I'm very pleased to welcome each of you, all of you, to this panel discussion on social implications of AI. These discussions are part of a set of discussions, including on AI and ethics and AI and social justice, that are part of the AI Tennessee initiative. The work that you all are participating in here now is part of a seed grant entitled Outreach and Engagement 1, whose purpose it is to provide information about activities and projects involved in the AI Tennessee initiative to the public. And the final product will be a series of modules consisting of interviews with seed grant recipients based on a set of questions that address issues relating to AI development, AI challenges, and social aspects, society in general, etc. Each of the seed grant interviews also focused on risks associated with AI. And in many ways, the answers we received were very much surprising and suggestive of significantly more work and research that could be done that those who are involved in each of the seed grants had never thought of, and in many cases would not have been able to conceive of, etc. So there's a back and forth that resulted from the effort to provide information about the initiative and the seed grants to the public, which also reverberate and return to the seed grant recipients, etc. So this session is specifically about AI and its social implications. And I will first introduce each of you. And the structure of this panel discussion will be that after you've been introduced, each of you will have the opportunity to make a statement about your work as it relates to AI, etc. Then you will have the opportunity to respond to each other's statements, and then we'll open up the discussion. There's a set of discussion questions that I sent out to participants last night that I will share on the screen, and each of the participants then will have the opportunity to address any of those questions. In one session that already took place on AI and ethics, this translates directly into a very productive discussion. And I have every reason to assume that the same will be happening here. So the first speaker will be Dr. Kenneth Fleischmann, who is a professor in the School of Information at University of Texas in Austin. He is also the founding chair of Good Systems, Ethical AI at UT Austin, one of 3 university-wide research grant challenges. His research on the ethics of AI has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, and several other organizations and institutes, leading to 7 Best Paper Awards and 3 Research Impact Awards. Dr. Fleischmann serves as the founding director of the undergrad studies for the iSchools BA and BS in informatics, and teaches courses in the ethics of AI at the undergrad and graduate levels, including receiving an award for innovation in undergrad studies. He is also the founding editor-in-chief of the ACM Journal on Responsible Computing. Amy Kurzweil is an American cartoonist and writer. In 2016, she published the graphic memoir Flying Couch. Her second graphic novel, Artificial, a Love Story, was released in 2023. She draws cartoons for The New Yorker, as well as other outlets. And I will read about the second novel, as it fits very much into the discussion that we have here. And so this particular section that I'll read is a visionary story of 3 generations of creators whose search for meaning and connection transcends the limits of life. How do we relate to and hold our family's past? Is it through technology, through spirit, art, poetry, music? Or is it through the resonances we look for in ourselves? In artificial, we meet the Kurzweils, a family of creators who are preserving their history through unusual means. At the center is renowned inventor and futurist Ray Kurzweil, who has long been saving the documents of his deceased father, Frederick, an accomplished conductor and pianist from Vienna who fled the Nazis in 1938. Once, Fred's life was saved by his art. An American benefactor, impressed by Fred's musical genius, sponsored his emigration to the United States. He escaped just 1 month before Kristallnacht. Now, Fred has returned. Through AI and salvaged writing, Ray is building a chatbot that writes in Fred's voice, and he enlists his daughter, cartoonist Amy Kurzweil, featured in the session, to help him endure the immortality of their family's fraught inheritance. Amy's deepening understanding of her family's traumatic uprooting resonates with the creative life she fights to claim in the present as Amy and her partner, Jacob, chase jobs and each other across the country. Kurzweil evokes an understanding of accomplishment that centers conversation and connection, knowing and being known by others. With Kurzweil's signature humanity and humor and boundary-pushing, gorgeous handmade drawings, artificial guides us through nuanced questions about art, memory, and technology, demonstrating that love, a process of focused attention, is what grounds a meaningful life. The third speaker will be Daniel Story, who is an assistant professor of philosophy at Cal Poly, SLO. He obtained his PhD in philosophy from the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2020. His research interests are broad and include shared agency, the philosophy of death, and the ethics of technology. His research on shared agency focuses mostly on acting together, on how acting together can lead to shared responsibility and moral luck. His research on death focuses mostly on death's badness. His research on technology focuses mostly on deepfakes and similar technology. Dr. Xiaopeng Zhao is a professor of mechanical, aerospace, and biomedical engineering at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. His research interest is focused on AI, social robotics, digital health, computational neuroscience, and brain-computer interface. Dr. Zhao is a recipient of National Science Foundation Career Award. His group has developed award-winning algorithms for physiological signal analysis and enhancement. Dr. Zhao has developed EEG-based diagnosis methods for detection of early Alzheimer's disease and traumatic brain injury. He also designed and developed multiple AI robotics, facilitated cognitive training, exercise, and diagnosis platforms based on multimodal physiological monitoring. He is the program director of AI initiatives at the College of Emerging and Collaborative Studies at the University of Tennessee, where he oversees a program committee to develop curriculum for AI degree programs at UT. So all of this having been said, I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Fleischmann. So let me switch the modality here. And please go ahead.
So in terms of the societal implications of AI, I wanted to start with a quote from The Simpsons, a toast that Homer Simpson gives to alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. And I think that you can pretty easily substitute technology into that quote and think of technology as the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. And as we see in techno-solutionism, or the idea of a tech fix, we're thinking about how to fix problems with technology, often problems caused by technology. So it becomes very circular. Lots of great science fiction has explored this theme, of course. I think that it's really important that we are, first of all, aware of the technology that is being used and how it works, and have an understanding of that. Of course, there's a lot of science fiction that explores the idea of technology as magic, when you have a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, for example, or other cases of time travel or travel across different cultures, where a technology that comes from one culture is found in a different culture and or time, and thus there's not the understanding of the origin of the technology and how it works, and it becomes magical. Actually, I believe Genevieve Bell has written about how people think about wireless signals often in a very magical way. That we have our practices about where we're going to get the best reception within our homes or other places, are kind of uh, practices that we've learned over time, but that may or may not be informed by the actual technical constraints of the of the technology, but are much more kind of folk logic, folk rhetoric around the technology. I think this is especially important with AI and the increasing role of AI in society, as today, it's increasingly becoming the case that AI could be seen as the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. It's fascinating to see, um, for example, in The Amazing Race now, when you take away the contestants' smartphones and other mobile devices, and hand them a physical map and ask them to navigate a city they've never been to before, how challenging that becomes when our technology is taken away from us in that way, and how dependent, how reliant we are on the technology, and the degree to which we don't even stop to think about that. We don't realize that until the moment we actually accidentally forget our phones at home, and we realize how limiting and constraining that can be, and how reliant we are on these technologies. So I've actually been focusing on ethics of AI for 25 years at this point. I started my PhD actually right before I started my PhD in the summer of 1999. I was working in an engineering lab where we were building, for example, decision support systems. So basically, an early form of AI. And one of the papers that came from that was bad numbers coping with flawed decision support, and thinking about how people deal with limitations of early versions of AI. Of course, now AI has no limitations, right? So there's still lots of limitations of AI, of course. So we're still quite busy. And actually, a paper that we published in Communications of the ACM in 2005 explored conceptually the importance of transparency in AI. In 2009, we published an empirical piece where we had interviewed researchers in an industry lab about the importance of transparency, or the degree to which they did or did not perceive transparency as an important value in AI design. That varied across domains. So there are some domains where transparency is already legally required. So for loan decisions, you're legally required to give a reason for a decision to not grant a loan. And so there's some necessity for transparency in narrow applications like that. But in most cases, that's not the case. It creates really interesting scenarios, like one that came from that field research. We published it years later in the Bridge by the NAE, where developers were faced with dilemmas like, do I use the system that's 99.9% accurate, but completely opaque and non-explainable? So, of course, deep learning based on neural nets is not explainable. So there's not an easy way to explain why that decision was made, versus a system that's 99.5% accurate, but it is transparent, is potentially explainable. You could give the user some indication of why the system is making the recommendation that it's making. We turn that into a educational case where students are designing a spaceship to go to Mars. and you're building the emergency support systems for the spaceship, and you're having to decide, do you prefer the sort of paternalistic system that watches over the users, but takes away their agency and has the most accurate performance, or do you prefer the system that maintains the agency of and empowers the users to make informed decisions, even if it is a slightly less accurate system? So it's an interesting example of the kind of value trade-offs that we face in AI. That was actually, we did a comparative study of that industry lab as well as academic and government labs, and published that in Computer, focusing on the value trade-offs. And today in Good Systems Ethical AI UT Austin, we have 6 core research projects that are looking at important societal implications of AI. We have one project focusing on information integrity. Used to be titled disinformation, but of course, a lot of these terms are gaining political valences, so sometimes strategic decisions are necessary for naming. Another project focusing on smart cities. Another project focusing on surveillance. One that's focusing on racial equity. One that's focusing on robotics. And then I'm co-leading a project along with Raul Longoria in the Cockrell School of Engineering and Sherry Greenberg in the LBJ School of Public Affairs on smart hand tools, which is looking at the future of work and the role that AI can play in work. But instead of replacing skilled trade workers, as a lot of robotics work is intending to do, or might have the consequence of doing, we're focusing on how to embed sensing, Internet of Things, and edge intelligence into hand tools, or additions to hand tools that could give workers real-time and retrospective feedback to help them to avoid repetitive stress injuries or workplace accidents, to make their work safer and more fulfilling, and also give them more control over how they're doing their work. So I think it's really exciting to think about how we can do AI that is benefiting society, that's serving social good, and doing the most good for those with the most need.
Thank you very much. Amy Kurzweil.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Ken, for starting us off. I also love that Ken started with a Simpsons quote, because that's a great segue into hearing from a cartoonist, Matt Groening, one of my favorite cartoonists. So thanks for that. So my work is more concerned with questions and answers, I would say. And I also appreciate hearing Ken talk about transparency, because I would say a big part of my motivation as a storyteller is to give people a way into having experiences with AI through me. And something that cartooning does that's really great is it gives people an avatar to project their identities into. So a lot of my work is about documenting experiences with technology, first-person experiences with technology, often strange experiences, and I'll talk about some of the pieces I've written, so that people can really embody that encounter with me. I think that's something that cartooning does really well, and drawing is something that really manifests the experience of someone's inner life and their feelings, and so my work is really about taking people on journeys in that direction and asking certain questions about technology that I think are very human. Specifically, what does it feel like to encounter AI? What does it feel like to encounter, strange technologies? How do these encounters change our sense of self, our self-conception, our sense of personal identity? And I guess the one I'm most concerned with also is, how do encounters with AI change our relationships? So a lot of my work is motivated by those 3 questions. And so what does AI facilitate in terms of human relationships, and what does it inhibit? And AI is a big term, and I'm sure we'll get into defining it, but I'm also interested in encounters with technology that we might not call AI. So social media is a theme that I've written about, even just the telephone, just things that extend our reach. Anything in that category I'm curious about. And so my specific investigations, I would say, started with this series I began in 2017 called Technophilia, which was published with The Believer magazine. And that piece, or that series, had 4 essays where I would go on some sort of adventure with technology. And so the first adventure I went on was I went to this old telephone museum in rural Maine, and I was investigating just this garage full of old machines and charting the evolution of that technology. I was curious about the role of the operator, and that we sort of take for granted that we've lost this human that facilitates our different techno communications. But now we're in this position where all of our techno communications are facilitated by tech companies. And so how has that changed from the operator, who's a single person, into this tech company that now sort of controls and facilitates our cell communications? What does that mean? I don't know. The piece is designed to ask that question and get you to think about it. The second piece in that series is about a trip I took to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which had an exhibit featuring holographic avatars of Holocaust survivors. I don't know if anyone is familiar with this exhibit, but it featured these interactive holograms of these 2 different survivors that were built from hours and hours of testimony that they'd done with 3D cameras. And basically, it was a very simple technology where it was really just kind of keyword matching, but it would provide the illusion of conversation. And I'm interested in these kinds of things we might call illusions that still facilitate deep, meaningful experiences. And so I documented that experience for myself, and also watching other people have these conversations with these holographic avatars and how that was deepening their interaction with history. And I reflect a bit on, personally, my first book is about my grandmother, who's a Holocaust survivor, and I was documenting her experience in my book, working with an oral history testimony that she had done. And I was asking the question at the end of the piece, what is the difference between interacting with a techno archive versus a real person? And there are some ways in which when you interact with an archive, you're actually free to ask certain questions that you're afraid to ask a real person. But of course, there's things that the techno archive can't give you that the person can give you. And so I'm curious about those gaps. The third piece in that series is about a trip I took to meet Bina 48, who is a robot some of you may have heard of. She's a kind of replicant. She's basically a head and shoulders on a desk, and she's built by Martine Rothblatt from the Terasem Institute. And Bina 48 is modeled on Martine's wife, Bina. And so there's kind of a mind file of Bina 48, and then there's the head and shoulders of Bina 48. And so I went and I had a conversation with this replicant. My fourth piece in the series is about therapy chatbots and what about the therapist relationship can be facilitated via algorithms, what's lost. And I asked some questions about specifically cognitive behavioral therapy and how that relates to these behaviorist methods we have. And some ideas that we have about machine learning, relating that to behaviorist ideas of mental health. That takes me to my book that Harry was generous to read the blurb about, Artificial, which is a graphic memoir about my father, Ray Kurzweil, inventor and futurist, project to create an AI version of his father. And so the book documents that project. And basically what my father did is he collected all of my grandfather's original writing and built a selective chatbot. So basically it's a like a large language model. Maybe it's more like a medium-sized language model, because this was back in 2018 when the technology was more primitive, the parameters were lower. And it was not a generative model, it's a selective model. And I'm sure we'll talk about the differences between those two in a minute. And this chatbot facilitated, again, it's sort of an illusion, like an illusory experience of communing with my grandfather. And the book asks questions about sort of what does that experience of having this kind of imagined relationship with a techno identity? What does that facilitate for me that I can't get from the archive alone? Which deepened my relationship with my grandfather? Really, was it the experience of chatting with this chatbot? Was it my experience spending time in the archive? Was it my experience drawing my grandfather's archives and drawing all these pictures of his writing and his photos and his music? He was a musician. And ultimately, I can't really untangle all of those things, because for me, the experience was bound, all of those experiences were bound up in each other. And I think that that's probably true for a lot of us. When we have experiences with technology and with AI, they are not isolated from our other human experiences with the humans and the human data and the human experiences that go into creating those AIs. And ultimately, I do think of AI as a kind of strange mirror. It is built from us. I don't think of it as an alien invasion, which is what I've heard Mustafa Suleyman call it. I don't think of it in that way. And all of that leads me to my project with Daniel, which is a framework for thinking about AI relationships and AI avatars. And I'm going to let Daniel explain our collaborative project and his other work.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So let me just say something generally about me, and then some of the projects I'm interested in. Then I'll talk about that chat project that is current right now and that Amy and I are working on. So I think as a philosopher, as Harry mentioned, I mean, I'm really interested in relationships, our relationships to one another, how we act together and live together, think about one another, and also our relationships to ourselves, to our own mortality and death, and so on. And so my work in connection with AI is interested in how AI changes our relationship to ourselves and to one another. So some of the specific projects that I'm interested in are focused on real world or near term future AI technologies that I think can have a profound impact on how we relate to one another, or again, on how we think about our own mortality or our lives. So just to give you 3 examples of stuff that I've been working on, one example is I'm involved with this project examining the use of AI and other automation technologies, in particular futuristic automation technologies in the food industry. This is something that people haven't talked much about really in any sort of academic literature, but I think it's worth talking about, and it's important because food is a really central aspect of human culture. And a lot of the value that we get out of food and a lot of the experiences that we have with and around food have a lot to do with the provenance of food, where it comes from, who it's made by, and so on and so forth. And just like in many other industries, it seems like the food industry is heading towards a major change, where a lot of the food that we're going to be eating in the future may be prepared or at least influenced by various forms of automation that are very distinctive from the automation that we use today in our kitchens. And that's very exciting to me, maybe very worrying to me, but you know, it's one thing that I'm interested in studying. Another project that I'm very interested in, that I sort of know more about than the culinary automation thing, which is new, is deepfakes. So, I mean, people have been talking about deepfakes really not for very long in terms of the academic literature, maybe 3 or 4 years. It's a fairly new phenomenon. There's various different concerns that people raise in connection with deepfakes. And by the way, just a deepfake, as I'm using the term, is just a video where one person's face or likeness has been superimposed using AI tools onto another person's face or onto another person's body to make it look like the first person is in the video saying or doing things that they didn't actually say or do. So there's various concerns that people legitimately raise in connection with deepfakes. I divide these into 2 different categories. So on the one hand, we have epistemic concerns, concerns about deepfakes that relate to how deepfakes might affect knowledge transmission or be used to spread misinformation or somehow in other ways disrupt testimonial practices. I think those are really important. issues, but actually they're not the ones that I'm mainly interested in. I'm actually interested in the non-epistemic effects of deepfakes. And just to give you an example, I mean, if you talk about deepfakes online, I mean, if you've encountered deepfakes, probably you've encountered deepfakes on a website like Reddit, SFW deepfakes, safe for work deepfakes, where all of the deepfakes you encounter there are flagged as fake. And so an ordinary viewer is not going to, if they're reasonable, form any beliefs on the basis of those deepfakes, at least beliefs that relate to the content actually occurring. But that doesn't mean that those deepfakes are ethically unimportant. And there are really serious questions about when, if ever, we are permitted to use someone's likeness in a deepfake, even when it's flagged as fake, even when it's not likely to spread misinformation or something like that. So that's what I'm interested in. So actually, my work in this area is really focused on deepfake pornography. There have been some studies that have shown that over 95% of deepfakes on the internet are pornographic. That doesn't mean that like 95% of people who have encountered deepfakes have encountered pornographic deepfakes, but just in terms of the number of videos online, most of them have this type of content. And the vast majority of those are non-consensual. So one question I've written a lot about is, why is it wrong to non-consensually create or disseminate deepfake pornography of someone? And in particular, I'm interested in why is it inherently wrong to do this? There are lots of potential negative effects that deepfake pornography can produce for the target, right? It can cause distress, damage reputation, alter their relationships in negative ways, and so on and so forth. But a lot of those effects are adventitious in the sense that they're contingent. They don't always occur. And so I'm interested in trying to articulate, well, if we ignore the contingent effects of deepfakes, what is the explanation for why doing this sort of thing is wrong? And I think it has to do with how you're altering a person's social world, and in particular, their ability to exercise autonomy over their relationships with others. So anyway, so that's one project we can talk about if you like, but now let me talk about this chatbot project, which is really dominating my attention recently. So this is a project that, as Amy said, we're working on together. And I guess one way of conceptualizing what we're up to is we're trying to develop a conceptual framework for thinking about and designing and using chatbots that imitate deceased people, which is conducive to human flourishing and not death denying or toxic. So, I mean, Amy and I think that basically, in a nutshell, chatbots of the dead should be at least compared to, if not thought of as, a form of art, and should be thought of by analogy to other art forms like memoir or historical fiction that represent deceased people. And we think that this model of chatbots of the dead, thinking of them as a sort of artistic representation of a deceased person, rather than something like an AirSat's companion or replacement or just a straightforward simulation of them, is likely to configure users' relationship to the bots in ways that will make the experience with the bots positive rather than either disrespectful to the deceased person or psychologically problematic, and so on. So yeah, we can talk about that more if you want. Let me just say one more thing about it. I mean, because I think it's kind of interesting. Most people, you've probably heard of this idea of using chatbots to represent deceased people. Most people, actually virtually everyone who talks about chatbots of the dead assumes that these chatbots will speak authoritatively and exclusively in a person's voice. That is, they will just be a pure simulation of the person and nothing else. So if you've ever seen that Black Mirror episode, Be Right Back, this is the kind of model that is implicit in that episode. It really set the tone for discussions of chatbots of the dead in the academic literature and otherwise. Well, we think this is a mistake. We think that chatbots of the dead needn't be designed to speak only in a deceased person's voice. They could be designed to speak extra diegetically, for example. They could be designed to break character. And they can be designed to represent various different aspects of a person. And actually, this is desirable, we think, once you start to, again, conceptualize these things as artistic interpretations. There's no one authoritative interpretation of Julius Caesar. You could have different plays or books depicting Julius Caesar doing different things. And those can all be valuable, even if none of them are conclusive or totally authoritative. Well, that's kind of how we think about chatbots of the dead. They're different ways of like highlighting a person's aspects of a person's identity and engaging a person's memory, but uniquely. Anyway, so yeah, so those are some of the projects that I'm interested in. I'm happy to talk more about it.
Excellent. This is I immediately have several reactions to this, but I won't indulge in them yet. So Xiaopeng, if you're ready.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about Daniel and Amy's creative way of using chatbots. In my research, we also developed chatbots, AI-powered chatbots for different purpose and applications. So since this is an event related to AI tendency initiative, I will start with our seed grant funded by AI Tendency Initiative. So the title of our project is called Social Machines and AI Robotics Technology. So we really focus on social problem, social engagement, and societal impact of AI and robotics technology. And this team has 22 faculty members from 10 different colleges. So it's a truly interdisciplinary. We're working on many different problems and with collaborations from so many different disciplines. Not everybody is working on every project, but we are addressing the problems from multiple directions, multiple disciplines. So in our research, we define social machine and AI robot as intelligent systems which are embodied in engineering constructs. So it's something built by humans, but it has AI capability. And then we also emphasize human-centered approach to say that the research is to design AI and the robotics technology to address societal need, to augment human capability, not to replace humans, but to amplify a person's capacity, capability in their work, in their job, and so on. We are currently working on a number of different projects and addressing research, education, outreach, service, etc. Because we are researchers, educators, we also design and conduct activities that involve students, local communities, engage with the stakeholders in Tennessee. So we are currently, the team have a primary focus to advance AI, advanced robotics technology to address those issues that are critical for people in Tennessee, benefit the population health, benefit the societal impact of problems in Tennessee, and so on. So I can give you a few example projects we're currently working on. So one of the projects is to develop a personalized education system with AI tutors. So we develop tutors based on AI technology to help students with special needs, students in special education category, we're developing technology to enable individuals to enhance their quality of living and to address problems such as social isolation, cognitive decline. So one application of a chatbot is that we are developing a chatbot based on previous research done by other people in the literature. People have been studying social isolation for many years. In the previous work, what you would do is you need either send a social worker to the home, or in the digital time, we set up online Zoom meetings so that a social worker will connect with the person, isolated person, a person with the need, and then they do a conversation on some selected topics, and then they do that frequently, 2-3 times a week, and then do it for an extended period of time. So previous clinical research have shown that this, of course, is beneficial to help to mitigate cognitive decline, help to reduce the social isolation problem. So what we are currently working on is to develop a virtual chatbot based on the previous data. So analyze the conversation strategy. So what's the most effective strategy to engage in conversation, in interesting discussion with the other person, so that they would like to talk to this AI chatbot? And how do you make sure the conversation is ethical, is safe from a cybersecurity perspective, to prevent people to hack into the system and therefore try to steal sensitive information and try to make harm, damage to the person, and so on. So that's one of the projects we're working on. So some other projects we're working on is to design AI robots and study how these AI robots can improve customer experience. Suppose in a bookstore, in a computer shop, you set up a robot which talk to the person instead of a real human customer service. Then what will be the appearance, and what will be the challenges when you set up studies like this? So those are the ongoing work with this team that is focused on, again, social machine and AI robotics technology. The research in my own lab mainly focus on using AI and the robots to improve quality of life for persons living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. We actually pay attention to issues such as ethical consideration, including fairness, privacy, equity, access, and so on. So there are a few key ethical questions when we are conducting research. I just mentioned them without expansion. So one problem is autonomy and the decision making. So the main idea is that we want to develop AI robotics technology that enhance the autonomy of a person, not to replace or decrease their autonomy. So not to say you have a robot that does everything for you, then you don't need to do anything. Data privacy and security. AI-powered robots will may collect very sensitive data, right, with or without the consent of the user, or even sometimes the researchers even don't realize this is a potential risk. Equity and access. So how do we make sure the assistive technology are affordable and accessible to all? So one example is that one of the robots we're using in research is pretty expensive. It costs $40,000. When we test the robots, a lot of participants, they are very excited to work with that robot. They want, because a very cute robot is able to sing, dance, play game and having conversation with the with participants. So everybody loves that robot, but not many people can afford to pay $40,000 to have a toy in their living room, right? So how can we address this problem to make sure the technology that being developed in the research lab can scale, can be disseminated into a field, can be used by the general public. And then there's also the question such as a human-robot interaction. Many big companies currently are developing their own robots, right? So it's becoming more and more popular, so-called humanoid robots, which are robots that look like human, which can talk like human, which can do things in a human way, and can do something better than human. We see that more and more robots being used in our lives. California recently had a restaurant which is totally operated by robots. You don't have any person there. And then we also see more and more often, so we see robotic server in restaurants, in hotels, in airports, in shops, and those are more and more frequent. And given the recent development of ChatGPT, large language model, and generative AI models, and then very soon we're going to see a lot of robotic devices everywhere. So what are the ethical issues and from human perspective, the acceptance, the usability, the safety, etc. All those questions are of bigger concern. So yeah, that's some of the questions we're working on. Thank you.
Excellent. This session is turning out as exactly as amazingly as I hoped it would. So would anyone like to respond to anyone else for starters?
Yeah, I actually have a question for Amy and Daniel. So I'm really fascinated by your project on creating these avatars of the dead, the chatbots that can allow you to interact with people who are dead. I love, Daniel, your point about not just being in character the whole time, but the different kind of meta narratives and whatever that could entail. I'm wondering, to me, I often look toward ground truth, some kind of hard data, and that would be hard to come by when coming up with avatars of the dead. However, there's a rather simple solution, which is avatars of the living. I actually found I encountered a kind of fascinating example of this in a course that it's a new course, although it's building on, I guess, about 17 years of teaching various forms of AI ethics, information ethics. But it's a course in our new Masters of AI that's offered at UT Austin. It's the only required course. It's ethics and AI. And I actually have students, I require students, it's an assignment that I'd done in the past where students would identify an AI ethics dilemma and write about that dilemma from the perspective of different ethical theorists from across time and around the world. I cover non-Western and feminist perspectives, not just dead white men. So it's very, kind of engaging, pluralistic perspective on things. And I reimagined the assignment in the era of ChatGPT to instead have students use ChatGPT or their large language model of choice to use some prompt engineering to get it to respond in terms of, for these various ethical theorists, some of whom are dead and some of whom are very alive, how they would deal with this AI ethics dilemma, and then to, in their own words, kind of reflect on what they learned, both about the ethical dimensions and also about the limitations and strengths of tools like ChatGPT. And I was kind of fascinated. One student first of all, wrote a blog post about his assignment. And secondly, one of his ethical theorists, I hadn't expected this, but was me. And so I saw this and I sent this to a colleague and I said, hey, look, this student used me as an example in this class and had me respond to his AI ethics dilemma. And my colleague wrote back and said, I've never heard you use the word pluralism before. Ironically, I just used it like 2 minutes ago. But anyway, apparently with this colleague, either he didn't recall or I hadn't used it. So I sent him a paper that had pluralism in the title of paper. And of course, the student had fed the algorithm various of my papers, including presumably this one as the basis for me. So, and then, my colleague's response was, something, or actually it was my doctoral student, Nitin Verma, who I also sent this to, he did his dissertation on deepfakes. So Dano, you and Nitin could probably have some great conversations. Nitin is actually now a postdoc at Arizona State University and the New York Academy of Sciences. But Nitin's response was something along the lines of, I couldn't authoritatively say that you didn't write this, Ken. So he could sort of deny it. It was sort of plausible that I could have written it. So I'm wondering if y'all have investigated, examined, thought about, or even undertaken any cases where you're building avatars, chatbots of living people, and then finding out how they perceive that, how they react to it, what their feedback is, and if, then incorporating that feedback would help to improve and make a sort of higher fidelity model of this living person.
I think I want to respond to that in a roundabout way. So I really love that assignment that you gave your students, first of all. It reminds me of something that when I was presenting on my book, a teacher came up to me and said that they had done an assignment with Catcher in the Rye. They'd had their students create a chatbot of Holden Caulfield so they could continue talking to him. And one of the reasons why he did that is because the students reflected that they were sad that the book ended and they couldn't continue their conversation. So I think these avatars of the dead, it's like avatars of anyone who we can't talk to and that we want to keep talking to. It extends to fictional characters, it extends to the living, and it's all kind of in this swirling space of like, what is this? And that's what is motivating Daniel and my project, is to give people a conceptual framework that actually can extend beyond just chatbots of the dead, that can extend into helping people understand what is happening when they talk to AI reflections of voices that are not coming originally from the consciousness of the person. So, I want to respond to your question by reflecting on my process as a memoirist, because I think this is what influenced our conceptual framework. So I write graphic memoir about people who are both living and dead. And there's something freeing about writing in the voice of the dead, because they are not there to fact check you. But I think that freedom is actually kind of an illusion, because you still have a responsibility to the truth and to represent, and you have a responsibility to at least contextualize the limitations of your ability to reflect the truth. And I think we actually in our culture get away with so much license to change the past. And this is not a problem just in AI avatars. It's actually a problem in all of art and all of documentation. But when I write about characters who are alive, people always are curious, like, what was that process like? Because they're anticipating that alive people are going to push back on their representations. And my mother, for example, who's a character in my first book, is sort of notorious for pushing back on my representation of her. And there's a scene in my first book where she actually edits the depiction of herself earlier in the book. And I think that that's a really instructive moment for representations. It's a sort of postmodern meta move that you might make as a memoirist, is to show the character breaking the fourth wall and saying, actually, I wouldn't have said it like this. The extra diegetic speech that Daniel mentioned is maybe a way that we can build some of that meta self-awareness into these AI chatbots, is to be constantly reminding people that this is an artistic, theatrical, important and deep and, you know, still like truth-oriented activity that we are trying to do with these AI avatars, but we are not going to get it perfect because we have never been able to get it perfect in any of our technologies of representation. So I think that's why this kind of constant back and forth and constant contextualizing needs to be built into the way that we interact with these technologies. Daniel, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, just, I guess, to affirm everything you said. I mean, yeah, so just to follow up on this last point that Amy was making, I mean, how you frame this technology matters a lot in terms of how people interpret it and approach it and what they infer from their interactions. I mean, so if you are framing these chatbots as, again, authoritative simulations of a person or AirSats versions of a person or something like that, then people are going to be more inclined to, first of all, identify the chatbot with the person that the chatbot is supposed to represent. And on the basis of that identification, even if it's somewhat inchoate, you know, make inferences about the person given the chatbot's responses that maybe they shouldn't make. But yeah, once you start to accentuate the representational frame and put forefront at people's mind that, look, this is an interpretation of a person that is truth-oriented, I think that was Amy's phrase, but not, you know, a perfect simulation. I think that, you know, creates a lot of leeway to enjoy the experience and to get something out of it that would otherwise be impossible, basically. Anyway, so in terms of like doing it of living people, I mean, I think that's a really interesting idea. One tiny little cottage question that people are interested in this literature is the ethics of creating bots of your ex. You know, so if you break up with someone, you know, you might be very sad that you can't interact with them anymore, but if you have thousands of text messages from them, you know, someone could create a bot of it. You know, and I think I don't have any views on this. I mean, it seems a little sketchy to me, but this is just an example of how, look, it's not only death that makes people inaccessible to us. There are lots of areas of, or lots of situations in life where someone you want to talk to or someone you love is no longer accessible. And chatbots don't give you access to that person again, but they do give you a new mode of interacting with that person's memory that can be valuable and, you know, good and meaningful if it's done right. Now, what it's done right looks like is going to depend on the context and the details, I think. Anyway, so I'm not sure how much that added to the thing Amy already said, but.
My main field as an academic is theory, social theory, or what I call theoretical sociology, which includes sociological theory and social theory and critical theory, etc. All of them are required to really deal with this befuddling reality that we're part of, so to speak. But as Amy and Daniel were speaking, the first thing that inevitably came to my mind is creating a chatbot of important thinkers and of classics. So, for example, what if we could design a chatbot of someone who produced as much work, as many writings as Marx, or as Hegel, or as Max Weber, or as Adorno, for example. And they could be designed in a number of different ways. So with regard to Marx, there are lots of different competing interpretations, obviously, of what Marx was trying to get across, but we don't know how he would have addressed developments and challenges that we are, for example, confronting today. And so one possibility would be to use his writings, and they're not just all theoretical academic writings. There's a lot of historical stuff. He worked as a journalist. There's a biographical material, etc. He was he engaged in various forms of art as well, etc. If all of this could be fed into a chatbot, plus one of the many different interpretations, and then unleash essentially conversation. I mean, it would be interesting to talk to Marx, for example. I mean, Anthony, AJ is here, so we've been working with the work of Moishe Postone as one of the most important and most creative interpreters of Marx. He passed away a few years ago, but he has a take on Marx, for example, according to which, but I mean, it's essentially a critique of different forms of traditional Marxism, and how lots of Marxism and lots of Marx interpretations really are based on a very conventional mental and cognitive attitude with regard to what theory is supposed to do and what understanding our world requires, whereas Marx was very much like Freud and many others, a revolutionary in mind. So he was trying to engender a different kind of consciousness, a different kind of awareness of what our place in this emerging new social system actually is. And so there's a major conflict between this very creative, dynamic, very much dialectical interpretation of Marx, basically applying Marx to Marx, so to speak, in order to propel us beyond the existing state of affairs, and lots of much more conventionalist interpretations of Marx, where Marx is all about exploitation, or he's all about classes, etc., 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 which are all very reductionistic and very very controversial and problematic interpretations, etc. And so having a chatbot of Marx, for example, through the lens of Postone, and then having students have the ability to talk with that Marx about our present circumstances, etc., would be very interesting. It also would be very interesting to have the chatbot based on Marx's writings and work, and then have two different interpretive lenses and have them engage in discussions, etc. And I'm referring to Marx because he's obviously very controversial, etc., but also because his work is really was really expansive. There's a lot of material, etc. There are also the differences between Marx and Engels and all of that, etc. But this also could apply, I mean, especially in philosophy, to lots of important thinkers like Immanuel Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and so forth, and having these simulated conversations that obviously would be dramatically sensitizing. I mean, what Amy was describing, the big term that was really the concept that was all over it was sensitization, sort of humanizing our way of relating to the world and each other, etc., where many of the ways of relating really are not human at all. They are extremely artificial. They are coded in various ways. They're instrumental, etc., and their consequences very much are destructive. But my mind immediately got going, etc. The possibilities are just absolutely stunning. But Ken would like to respond, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Actually, I was wanting to talk about Kant just before you had even mentioned Kant, so that was perfect. So one of the readings that I use in my ethics classes is a chapter by Honora O'Neill on Kantian ethics. And so O'Neill starts by talking about Kant's ethics and about Kant himself, and then starts talking about Kant's ethics in terms of kind of critiques of Kant, and then Kantian ethics, which can't really be one-to-one correlated with the actual writings of Kant, but it's sort of like the aftermath. In terms of social theory, I'm especially thinking of the concept of hyperreality. So we have, and it's a little bit different if we're talking about from Umberto Eco versus Jean Baudrillard in terms of the particular flavor and purpose of hyperreality. But I mean, hyperreality is basically more real than real. And so they both write about Disneyland, and the Jungle Cruise is an example of people. I guess the Echo take is that people find the Jungle Cruise particularly compelling because it better aligns with their idea of what the experience would be like than the actual experience would be, because they have their own imaginary and this ride better simulates their imaginary than the reality because of how far their imaginary is from the reality. Baudrillard then takes it a step further and sort of uses that as allegory of how the purpose of Disneyland is to make you think the rest of LA is real and not fake. And it makes me then think of these kind of AI-based avatars in relation to a much longer standing tradition, which is the tradition of parodies. And for example, I was thinking of Tina Fey's parody of Sarah Palin, and the degree to which that in many ways became hyperreal, from the standpoint that I don't believe Sarah Palin actually was ever recorded literally saying, I can see Russia from my house. But I would imagine there might be some surveys of the American public where a decent chunk of the American people would have attributed that quote to Sarah Palin based on the Tina Fey parody of Sarah Palin, and the degree to which that was taken as hyper, that had a sort of hyper real quality. And I think it's an interesting then in and that's a public figure, so that's different from Daniel, some of the examples that you were giving in terms of in people's personal lives, etc. But it's really fascinating to think about, and I guess that is one potential model of what should or shouldn't be in bounds or out of bounds in AI. I mean, I think in that kind of parody, there's always the assumption the audience should know that that's not actually the celebrity, and they often will hilariously, like, I think Amy Poehler did one with Hillary Clinton, for example, where Hillary Clinton showed up as Amy Poehler was doing her Hillary Clinton impression. So, often they'll do that kind of juxtaposition where you'll see that in relation. A less political example is Bill Shatner, that he often reacts to how the sort of Shatnerisms, the degree to which people overemphasize some of his dramatic speaking qualities, and that becomes a kind of hyper real, people imagine even more profound than if they were to go back and watch the original series. They would necessarily find it in any one particular episode. So yeah, I think that's a really, I guess that's another question for y'all. To what extent, when we're thinking about AI-based versions, whether we're talking about deepfakes or virtual avatars, etc., how useful are these past precedents of things like impressions and parodies, and to what extent do these represent a new domain that requires us to think differently, legislate differently, etc.?
That's so interesting. I really, really appreciate that example of the hyper reality of these parodies, and the way whenever there's a reflection, it feels like it goes back just to like the history of photography and the history of film in general, that whenever there is a reflection of something that influences the thing itself, and there's this kind of recursive reality that forms. So I appreciate that example because it shows that these are not new problems that we're encountering. And I do think my intuition is that what really matters is the intention of the representation. So parody as an example is interesting because the intention of parody is to diminish or to poke holes in. Maybe diminish is too strong a word, but it feels like in the Sarah Palin example, the purpose of that parody is, one, to entertain, but two, to represent and sort of like in a funhouse mirror way, like reflect and caricaturize some of the aspects of Sarah Palin that, society found objectionable. And any sort of political parody has that quality, and that's really useful for public figures, for political figures that were, cartooning has such a huge history of that. That plays a useful political role, but that is the intention of those representations. And then the fact that they have this hyper real recursive effect on our social sense of those characters is intentional, and it means that political technology is working successfully. So then what is the intention of our AI characters? Like, I think that's really the question we need to ask. If the intention, and of course we can't legislate people's intentions, but we can build a culture around reflection on intention. And if the intention of our AI characters is to deepen our relationships with people who have passed away, to more deeply understand Marx, right, rather than use him for our own agendas, to understand ourselves more deeply, to reflect on the human condition, right? Like if we get down to those sort of core good ethical intentions, then I think that's sort of the I don't know, just like our best bet for directing these technologies ethically.
Yeah, just to add one little tiny thing to what Amy said, I mean, just as in, let's say, film representation, there's a broad range of purposes you might have in depicting someone or something. Similarly, for chatbots, there's a broad range of legitimate purposes you might have in creating them. And the purposes that you have in any particular instance are going to affect how you should design the chatbot, and they're going to affect also how you should evaluate it. They're going to have an impact on the aesthetic standards that are applied and on the ethical standards that are applied. And when we're talking about chatbots of the dead, I mean, I think this is something that people in these discussions really frequently fail to recognize, because again, there's this assumption that there's only really one way to design these. And behind that, there's this implicit idea that, well, there's really only one purpose that people can have, to talk to the dead. Well, one thing that we're trying to do is kind of complexify that a little bit. I mean, that's not the only purpose. It's not even clear if that's a well articulated purpose. But anyway, that's not the only purpose you might have in creating one of these. And once we start to think about, well, why do we want these bots? That opens up this virtually limitless space of creative possibility, I think. Anyway.
I had a question for Xiaopeng actually, which is in a different direction, but if it's okay to
go ahead.
redirect. Yeah, so I'm really interested in your project about virtual chatbots for social isolation because of some of the investigation I did around therapy chatbots. And something that came up when I was interviewing people, I interviewed, for example, I interviewed somebody who was a crisis text counselor. So she's a human and she has this job of texting with people who are in crisis. And a question that she would get a lot, or at least often enough that it was notable to her to share with me, was people wanted to know if she was a robot. And they were suspicious of an interaction where there was a non-human consciousness on the other end of it. And so I'm just curious what your experience has been, either anecdotally or in the research, around people resisting the conversation with the non-human entity, especially if they are like explicitly dealing with an issue of social isolation.
I think you're muted.
Good question, Amy. So the social companionship, which presented to human by technology, right? This has been a topic for studied for a long time, and yeah, with today's technology, it's even harder and harder to tell whether the person I'm talking to or the face to remotely, right? So either by text or by video, it's really hard to tell. But I don't have an answer on that, but I can address the problem of companionship. I think companionship is actually very important. There are research shows that especially for social isolated person, for person with cognitive decline, and then previous research shows that even with robots, toys, or pets, you can present the design intervention using those technology to provide the social companionship to them, to those patients, and then they actually play a positive effect from their health perspective. So I think that if we do it right, right, then AI robot can address this issue of social isolation. This is right now becoming a crisis in the United States, because we have so many people living alone, and then so many people withdraw from the social interaction with others because they rather attach to their phone and play video games, or they do shopping, do everything online, and then talk to another person. So I think this is an issue, and then technology can address this. But how can we do this in an ethical way? Because the problem we talked about, right? So you create a virtual avatar, and then if someone purposefully replicate another person using AI, and then they will pretend to be that person and ask for sensitive information, ask for money, etc. And those are problems we have to pay attention to.
Daniel?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that question. So, I mean, one thing that Amy and I think is characteristic of a healthy relationship to a chatbot of the dead is that users think of it as, on some level, a form of make-believe or fiction or pretend. Now, like just because an interaction is, let's say, in some sense fictional, doesn't mean it can't be emotionally impactful or valuable in other good ways. So in your experience, I mean, so people who are, let's say, isolated or lonely and are interacting with a chatbot or interacting with, let's say a robot cat or anything in between, I mean, are people interacting with this in this sort of fictional mode? Or do you think that they only really can get something really out of it if they somehow, like, at least temporarily lose sight of the fact that, well, this is not a real person, and they kind of think of it as a real person. Does that question make sense?
Makes sense. I would say this is actually a new question. Because technology advanced so fast, right? So for example, previous study on social companionship, they were using robotic robotic seal. So that's apparently, although that baby seal sounds like a baby, but apparently you tell, any normal person can tell it's not real, right? So they sometimes use a robot and then play the role of a friend, a companion, a caregiver, but apparently you tell it's a robotic, it's artificial. But we are going to face a lot of new challenges, new problem, because the robots become more and more like a human. And either we create those images virtually or physically. This become a new problem, and then it's the question you asked, those were not not tangible questions before, but now they become tangible questions. So I feel being comforted because this is social isolation, social interaction, or I feel being comforted because I was cheated. Right? So people tell me this is a real person, but it's not a real person, right? So that maybe that there are more parameters, factors, may have mixed feelings. We need to study all the nuances and then separate those more carefully. So again, I don't have an answer, but I like the question very much. I think it's a great question to ask.
Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask also Xiaopeng a question, which I think actually converges the questions that Amy and Daniel just asked with our earlier conversation. I'm curious for, I mean, my understanding is that your research involves chatbots that interact with people who are experiencing dementia, Alzheimer's or related dementia. I'm thinking of the example of so for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, there's an increasing practice, and actually my understanding is that the ALS Association has a free service for voice banking. So these are people who are progressively losing their ability to speak, and people make the intentional choice to bank voice samples so that it would be possible to make a high fidelity computer reconstruction of their voice. What I'm wondering is, in your research with this population, or actually I'm curious also, Amy or Daniel, in terms of your research on these various purposes of these kinds of virtual AI-based avatars, if anyone is asking for or is exploring or looking at a kind of personality banking where people could tell stories and talk about themselves to build a better avatar, a better chatbot that, say, in the early stages when one is first diagnosed, but has not experienced, but is in the early stages. If anyone would be interested in or would find it useful or find it really, maybe really creepy and really not something they'd want to do, but to try to train a chatbot on their personalities, on their experiences, on their memories, so that loved ones like their grandchildren, etc., could interact with this avatar of themselves, for example, alongside them as they're increasingly experiencing a more severe case of dementia, but kind of as a stand-in. Are you aware of any research like that?
I'll,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add, I know there's a company called Hereafter, and there's an interesting article in, I believe it's Wired, written by the author whose name is escaping me. Oh, James Vlahos, I think is his name. But he created this company called Hereafter, which is basically a chatbot avatar company where you share you as your loved one is declining, you interview them, you share stories from them. And I don't think he posits it as something that you would interact with while they're still there, but I do think that's probably happening, right? Inevitably, because if you're creating it as the person's declining, then inevitably you're also going to be interacting with it while they're there. And I think that's an interesting dimension. You should read his article because I think he does reflect on some moments where that's happening, and that's not actually his intention, but.
Yeah, I agree with Amy that these initiatives are probably happening somewhere in some way. So, and because of the new AI technology, I think they introduce new problems and the new layers of capabilities. For example, previously, if I recorded the voice, I just play the voice, I'm using some device. Apparently, that person will say, okay, I just relive that memory. I appreciate this valuable information and the experience, but no, it's not a person. But then if someone creates a video, a fake video, right, or even the words that that person never said, or never saying that person never done. So those, I think the society does not have a common understanding or even common boundary how to think about this thing, how to deal with them. Those are new problems.
Daniel?
Yeah, I just want to add something. This is maybe only relevant by association, but I think it's interesting to think about, interesting possibility. One type of chatbot that Amy and I have discussed is what we call like a snapshot bot. So, we often speak as if a person has a single voice, like we talk in terms of authorial voice, but that's a gross oversimplification. Like at any given time, you speak in different voices in different contexts, but also your voice, I mean, this was, implicit in what Kim was saying, changes over time. And when you're asked about designing a chatbot on someone, I mean, you need to ask, well, what point in their life, right? I think it'd be really interesting personally to design chatbots of me at different points in my life and then interact with them. Like, I think it would be interesting to interact with my 15-year-old self or my 25-year-old self. And this would be potentially a very interesting way of, I don't know, gaining some self-knowledge that might otherwise be inaccessible, or at least relating to your past self in kind of a cool way. So anyway, there's not directly relevant to what you were asking, Ken, but
it's something you were saying earlier, Daniel, so sparked a reaction, and in my mind too. In my teaching, I've started teaching. I've been using film excerpts of films in my courses for 25 years, basically. But I've started teaching a course on science fiction, focusing on AI and sociology about 10 years ago or so, and it's been morphing into different forms, etc. And so, I mean, one point I make in my courses is that there are great benefits of watching films several times. So, I mean, if someone likes a film, it's criminally negligent just to watch it once. It has to be watched at least 2 or 3 or 4 times. And every time we watch a film, especially a film we like, we appreciate, it has meaning to us, that tells us something, multiple times, the film every time changes. It's each time it's a different film we watch. And obviously the film functions as a means to trigger an internal reflexivity on our part. I mean, scenes seen the first time might just be standard scenes, and then the second time they turn into something else. There's one particular scene that had a profound impact on me. I liked the first 3, 4 Bourne movies. The last one was terrible, but at the end of the second Bourne movie, Bourne, whose real name is Daniel Webb, I think it's Daniel Webb, if I remember correctly. So Jason Bourne goes to Russia. He knows that his first job was to execute one of the pro-democracy politicians in Russia, and because of circumstances arose, he had to kill his wife too. And so he killed this couple of progressive pro-democracy fighters, etc. But they had a child, and so he's in the second film. He's trying to find out who he is. It's a Bourne identity initially, but it's all about his identity. Who the hell is he, etc. And so he keeps retracing his steps, reconstructing his constructed self and his former self after suffering David Webb, that's correct, from amnesia, etc. And so he goes to Moscow, and he ultimately wants to meet the daughter of the couple he killed. And so at the end of the film, he basically waits for her in her apartment to tell her that he's the one who killed her parents, and that he basically knows that she hated her parents because the official story was that the mother killed the father, the wife killed the husband, etc. And so there's been a huge burden for this young woman to bear, that her parents essentially killed each other, etc. And she, as a consequence of that, in her early teen years, was a lonely child in Russia. And so visually it's great. It's in one of those anonymous apartment complexes, etc. Really dreary. It's in the winter too, etc., etc. And so he goes to her and he tells her, and it's an absolutely devastating scene. I mean, he's destroyed her entire sort of constructed identity, falls apart because now she knows the truth. She basically hated her parents for no reason at all, etc., etc. And it's amazing. The first time I saw it, I thought that it's cool, yeah, fine. I mean, it's a good way of ending the film, etc. I was thinking about becoming a director at some point, or pursuing that at least. And so that's kind of my intuitive approach to film. And then every time I saw the scene again, because I watched the film, I don't know, probably 20, 30 times over the course of the months and years, etc. It's an absolutely superb scene. I mean, it's a gem, etc. And so what I communicate to students is that film proper, I mean, it has to be good films, and not Starship Troopers. So even though you could even get something out of that, etc. It's Robert Heinlein and so forth. But really good films are kind of a school of life, because in life we don't have the opportunity to revisit particular situations. We find ourselves in circumstances without really being in control of ourselves, without really having agency. We respond to the circumstances. The circumstances really dictate how we respond to them, etc. And then we have to live with however we acted in this particular situation for the rest of our lives. Watching films and rewatching films, etc., gives us an opportunity to imagine how we would conduct ourselves if we would have the benefit of being able to essentially roll the tape back, so to speak, or the DVD, etc. And so students really appreciate that because it changes how we perceive ourselves. I mean, it sort of provides us with a certain amount of foresight as we enter into a particular situation, because we know that depending on how the situation plays out, it will be with us, etc. And it may be something positive, but it also could be something really negative, etc. A real burden. And so this entire conversation, what it's been sort of pointing towards, and what it's been leading me towards, is this tagline of the second Blade Runner film, the sequel, Blade Runner 2049, which is of course more human than human, or more human than humans, etc. And so our conversation, our discussion really has been going in that direction. In several different ways, because I mean, what defines us? I mean, one of the things that definitely defines us is sort of my interest. One of my interests in AI is our mendacity. I mean, we are naturally mendacious. We constantly project images of ourselves, etc. We are instrumental. We try to achieve certain purposes, certain outcomes in terms of how we interact with others, etc., etc., etc. And this is something that's beyond AI, obviously, and it's not really possible. I mean, it is possible, but it's entirely incongruous with our idea about AI, that AI too is mendacious. There are deep fakes, etc., and there's of course mendacity there, etc. But usually we sort of conceive of an AI as something that's pure, that's entirely rational, that's honest, that's true. And this is the whole setup with 2001. It wasn't HAL 9000's issue, it was poor programming, etc., contradictory programming, cognitive dissonance built into HAL's programming, etc., that HAL was not prepared to resolve, etc. And so in a sense, AI properly designed is, on those terms, more human than human too. And then when Xiaopeng referred to his example in response to Daniel's prompt about how to prepare for Alzheimer's, the consequences of Alzheimer's, once a human starts really suffering from Alzheimer's, the person becomes less than human, because the person really loses the ability to communicate in time. In space and time, etc. Yes, if it's something happened 30, 40 years ago, but not if it happened yesterday or this morning or half an hour ago, etc., etc. And so AI could serve as a means there too, to enable a person who's becoming less human in this technical sense to retain a modicum of humanity, which otherwise simply would disappear. So this is absolutely fascinating. We never got to the questions. I don't think we need to get to the questions, obviously. I will post the questions as part of the module, and so I mean, if you had a chance to look at them, I'm sure they fed into your presentations, your statements in some form. So there is no loss as far as I'm concerned. But I asked one question at the end of the previous session, which I think makes a lot of sense here too, which has to do with our job as educators. And I very much determinedly include Amy in this, because you're obviously a messenger too. You're an educator too. Your work is obviously inspired by this. And so in terms of AI and social implications, I'd like to give you the opportunity to address what this means for our responsibility, our primary responsibility as educators, as pedagogues, as people who are the connection between previous generations and future generations. And so I'm doing this in my approach to science fiction films, for example, is that they only matter if they provide really important messages. If they do something to the audience, if the audience is not the same after having engaged with the movie, same as with the novel, obviously, etc., etc., etc. So if you would be willing to address this question, I very much would be appreciative and enjoy it. So whoever wants to go first, if you're willing to do so, please go ahead.
Okay, I can start. So in the previous session, I already mentioned that I think education is important, and then I think education of AI literacy is relevant for everybody, right? So from children to adults, all the disciplines, and not just for researchers, but also policymakers and so on. So I like to share a little more of my personal use of AI in my own teaching. I use AI tools in a few of my courses, and then I encourage students to use AI to solve homework problem, and then discuss the solutions, whether they're right or wrong, and so on. So I basically encourage the students in my class use it as much as possible. And at the end of the semester, I did a survey to ask them, what do you use it for, and how do you think the impact of AI to your education and so on. So do you think it's a positive, negative, and so on? So some students give very positive feedback, and they believe using the tools greatly enhanced their study. But also we got a negative feedback. So a student particularly mentioned that it's not very helpful for him because he used to wait until the last hour, then do the homework. Now he waited until the last minute to do the homework. So he spent less effort. So my purpose was to encourage students to spend more time to learn more, but it turns out the effect was that they spend less time and they learn less. If you become overly reliant on AI, and then it's not going to benefit from education purpose, but actually going to have a negative impact. So I think this is the problem as educator when we continue to educate students not only about AI technology, but also use AI to reshape the pedagogical instruction tools, methodology, etc. We need to keep in mind the potential positive and negative impacts.
Yeah, I would say it's one takeaway for me. This is something that we encountered in building good systems. First of all, good systems is not just about good AI, but it's about good human AI partnerships. But it begins with this idea of good. And this is something that, of course, many different human societies over centuries have debated and had very different views on. And Harry, you've just introduced another really important, really contentious definition, which is the definition of human. And there are still important ongoing debates about when human life begins, as well as when human life ends, and other aspects of, this sort of notion of being human, what it means to be human, that are, very important and remain today. Again, have been debated by in many different cultures around the world for centuries and remain very much in play. Including with some major policy implications in this country as well as others today. So I think that as we talk about the importance for increased AI literacy in society today, it doesn't just mean increased technological literacy of the technical aspects of AI. It means grappling with these fundamental questions of what is good, for whom, under what circumstances, and what is life, what is humanity, when does it begin, when does it end, who has it, who doesn't have it, under what conditions, etc. I wish we lived in a world where everyone always understood and appreciated and respected the humanity of others, but we're painfully aware that that's not the case. That's not the world that we live in. So for all of us to reflect on making sure that we're all appreciating each other's humanity to the fullest extent possible, and that we're all acting working to act to do good as we understand it to benefit society is a really important aspect of an AI literate society.
I'll go next. I resonate with a lot of what Ken just said about reminding AI can remind us of our humanity. I think speaking of sci-fi movies, really what sci-fi movies do when they're about AI is challenge the question of what it is to be human, right? That's usually what they're doing. So I would say that my work as an educator in the AI space is working sort of with and against sci-fi, because I was originally calling my book Artificial a sci-fi memoir. and then my agent was like, don't call it that. but I think what's really interesting about sci-fi is that it takes our fears about AI, about space, about about these things that we encounter that are not human and that question our sense of being human. We take our fears about them and we often kind of manifest them into something that is exaggerated, right? Or a caricature of that fear. And then speaking of hyper reality, then that fear kind of that caricaturization of our fear sometimes loops around and then enters the conversation about reality. And I see that that's happening in our discussions about AI, is that sometimes, and I think we really haven't done that in this conversation, but sometimes conversations about AI are conversations about sci-fi AI, not conversations about AI that are actually happening in our world. And in this conversation, we've really talked about AI that's happening in our world, and I really appreciate that. And that's what I want my work to do as an educator in this space, is to get people to talk about, well, what is this actually like? What are some specific examples of it? How are they good? How are they bad? And to talk less about the sort of invasion, right? Fear. But I still think that those visions are useful as long as we understand that they're metaphorical, so that's often what I think my work is trying to do. And another thing I'm trying to do with my work is to remind people of the mark of the human being. So part of why I like to draw, and what I think drawing does, is reminds people that I'm a real person who's thinking through these ideas. And I feel like AI, when it can be specifically directed towards connecting individual humans, and we can put a question mark on what that is, but individual humans to other individual humans, individual human to a group of human, groups of humans to groups of humans, right? When AI is really directed at that kind of connection, I think that's when we're in the best spot with using it ethically. And that to me feels like a framework for evaluating its ethical implications, is how much is it really connecting people across time and space, and where it's obscuring that connection, that's when we need to sort of look at it more deeply.
Yeah, and I guess I'll end here. I mean, I just want to say, first of all, I agree with everything everyone has said so far, and this is continuous with a lot of those remarks. I mean, I think a really important part of AI literacy that maybe philosophers are especially in a good position to contribute to is thinking about what activities are worth doing, and more broadly, what a good human life looks like. And I mean, in the classroom, one of my main pedagogical goals is to help my students have fun, really. I mean, and to access this distinctive intellectual pleasure that they might not otherwise experience or find. I mean, I teach a lot of non-majors, a lot of computer science students, for example, and I think there's something distinctively fun and pleasurable about philosophy, and I try to show them that and make the pitch that, hey, this is worth doing. And, this is, part of an extension. The way this relates to AI is I'm trying to make a case for, look, the work you do in this class, yeah, maybe you could outsource it to artificial intelligence, but maybe you shouldn't, because you're going to be missing out on something that is worth experiencing, worth doing. That's something that, makes life good or contributes to human flourishing. And I think, like, more generally, when we're thinking about how we want AI to contribute to our lives, we need to think about what we want out of life. And even if, you know, there are lots of activities that are automatable, that we could outsource, maybe not everything, and not everything that's onerous or difficult is worth doing that for. So anyway, I mean, that's kind of the pitch I try to make in connection with, you know, AI and education. And I think it's just as much of an important part of AI literacy as actually understanding the technology and how it works. It's like reflectively thinking, well, what do you want from AI? And I think, you know, there's often a tendency with commercial AI for that AI to colonize every aspect of our lives. And I think we should try to resist that, but only in certain places. And we have to think seriously about, well, which places is it good to remove this task and which is it not? Anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. That's been excellent. So you may have noticed Anthony, who goes by AJ, who's a lecturer in sociology and who has been helping us with creating the modules, etc. Do you want to ask anything or make a comment to close this out?
Oh wow, no pressure, huh? I mean, I mean, it's been a fascinating conversation. I suppose I'm honored to be on the ground floor of being able to listen to this conversation. I don't know if I have anything super profound to add, besides perhaps, you know, I just really appreciate thinking through, you know, the different ways that we're all trying to work through the relationship between humans and AI, and trying to think through what you know, what it really means to grapple with that, to grapple with these issues ethically, and in a way that doesn't that actually could increase human flourishing rather than either diminish it or to perhaps scare people in the worst case scenarios. So perhaps not as that's the ending I got for you.
Yeah, sorry, I sprung it on you. Okay, thank you very much. This was absolutely great. I'm very, very grateful that this was able to be put together on such really very short notice. So we'll all stay in touch, obviously. You should expect quite a few emails from me over the course of the next 2 weeks and months. Cannot say anything else. This was absolutely superb.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us together.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is fun.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's see you.